بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا مولانا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Jazakallah khair to all of you for coming out. MashaAllah, this is a very important event, and it was something I think the community desired, and it's important for the community to be able to discuss. The title of this event is My Masjid, My Home. And when you talk about your home and you talk about the masjid, the reality is that for us, these two things have to be interchangeable. Our home is just as the masjid is for us, and our masjid is just as our home is for us. We should feel comfortable there. We should feel that it has a right over us, and we should feel it's a place where we can go when things are difficult for us. But in order to be able to have that kind of relationship with our masjid, we have to feel that it is a safe space in the first place. And unfortunately, in light of certain things that have happened in the DFW area and the community, and really, if you just think about it across the country, in light of that and the instances and incidents, we want to be able to, number one, discuss these things and talk about them in a manner where somebody can feel comfortable going to someone else. We should make it a place where someone, if something happens to them, they don't have to feel like, you know what, I have to hide this, otherwise the community will shame me. Part of getting to that point as a community is being able to discuss it. So, number one, what are some of the issues that we've seen? And really it boils down to two particular things. And inshallah our speakers are going to go deeper into them, but it ties into spiritual abuse and also then this concept of sexual abuse. And both of these things are something that's not acceptable to the masjid. It's not acceptable in a masjid. It is something that we have to make sure is completely intolerant. We're intolerant of these things in our masjid. And so I'm not going to continue speaking any further, inshallah. What I'd like to do is invite Ustadh Murphy up to begin. And inshallah he's going to go, and then after that we'll have Brother Gamal as well for his perspective.
Good job.
Good job.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. So first of all, jazakumullah khairan to everybody for coming out this is actually one of my favorite masjids in the Metroplex. I was telling my wife on the way here that there's something beautiful about the intimate community feel, the small community feel. I know that in the era of trying to build very large facilities, of course there's a reason for that. The community is growing, but without a doubt there's never ever, for me at least, a prayer, a salawat with a khushu, like a prayer in masjids that are very cozy and intimate. And so I prefer to be at places like this. That's why when Imam Haris, he texted and asked and saw me, it wasn't even a matter of, oh yeah, if I want to or not. It was a matter of my schedule, and I was happy to be here. And there's just a few things that I want to shed light on. Obviously we have Brother Gamal, mashallah, who's a specialist in understanding what it means to be secure and to understand this idea of community security and even the interdynamics that exist between people and groups that are important for us to get some information from a specialist so that we can know certain things that might be red flags or things that might be good trends, best practices in the field of security in general. But my reflection for you tonight is basically 3 points. And it's really for everybody to think about deeply and independently. The first is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks extensively in the Quran about something that every single person should have a concern about. And this is something that I think that when we hear about things that happen in the masajid, whether it is in Dallas or whether it's outside of Dallas, we've all heard of stories. We've all heard of, we can call them, abhorrent behavior, we can call them indiscretions, but really what it is, what Allah calls them is dhulm. Allah describes it as an oppression. It's something where a person's right has been abused or taken from them without any cause or without any justification. And when you talk about abuse within the context of the Muslim community, what it actually is it falls into this category of dhulm. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, when He talks about dhulm in many different scenarios, He talks about the abhorrence that He feels towards it. He talks about the darkness that it causes in the heart of the person, the zalim who's doing it. He talks even about, in some hadith share, the idea of the person who has been oppressed, that their oppression gives them a very special status with Allah. That's why, for example, in one of the ahadith it's narrated or it's referred to us, that the person who is the oppressed, the person who is the victim of oppression, that between them and Allah and the dua that they make to Allah, there is no barrier. And so we are told to be very concerned about the dua of the oppressed, because that person, by virtue of their victimhood or the oppression or trauma that they've gone through, that person has now ascended to proximity with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is something obviously that is a very, very serious conversation, a very serious topic. And when it comes to dhulm, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, He demands that each and every person, number one, make sure that they are people who are constantly aware of the dhulm that is around them, but number two, also the oppression that they have within themselves. The oppression that they are causing within themselves. Obviously, we know that oppression within ourselves can be the sin that we commit. We oppress our own souls when we commit sins. When I skip Fajr prayer, I'm actually oppressing my own self. But the other oppression that I'm committing is when I stay silent or when I stay accomplice to people who I know are experiencing trauma or difficulty at the hands of somebody else, and I simply brush over it, or I don't make any sort of comment or any sort of charge to make sure that this person can have islah of their situation, of their hal, of their state. And so this conversation is not something that is a new conversation. I don't want people to come to this event and think, oh, this is like, you know, it's something that we've never had to talk about before. That's not true. This is actually something that Islam from day one has addressed. It's just different language, right? But ultimately, the category that we're talking about is that someone here or some people here have been oppressed. And this is something that the Prophet ﷺ would never ever stand for. There's a beautiful hadith where the Prophet ﷺ explains to the believers that the dignity and honor of a Muslim is more beloved to Allah than even his own Kaaba, his own house. And so when you talk about what does dhulm do, dhulm actually, it deflates the dignity of a human being. That when a person experiences oppression, it's not only the physical oppression. You know, they say, there's a beautiful line of Arabic poetry where the poet says that the wounds of stones and sticks can heal, but the wounds of the tongue can never heal, meaning that so there are some things that go beyond the skin. There are some things that exist beyond the damage of the skin or the muscle. The bruises go away, the wounds, they heal, they'll scab and heal eventually. But the impact of the wound on the heart of a person, on the personality, on the psyche, on the mental health of a person, is something that we cannot see. It's something that we cannot quantify very easily. And so when we talk about this idea of dhulm, we have to understand that this is also preserving the dignity of our brothers and sisters. And this is something that is without a doubt a fard kifaya on our community. Without a doubt. And even fard ayn on each and every person, that when we see the dignity of our brothers and sisters being removed from them, that we have a responsibility to make sure that that dignity is safe from harm, is not being taken away. The Prophet ﷺ, in every moment of his life, one of the greatest achievements that he was able to successfully accomplish was he was able to preserve the dignity of people. Whether that person was oppressing themselves with their own words, or whether that person was being oppressed by other people. I mean, even things as small as verbal abuse and harassment. Abdullah bin Mas'ud was somebody who was known to have very skinny legs. He was somebody who was known to be of small stature. He was short, he had skinny legs. And one time he was climbing a tree, and he was getting some dates down from one of the date palms, and some of the companions saw his legs and they thought that it would be funny to make jokes about his physical stature. And the Prophet ﷺ, as a means of making islah of this, you know, sure, it was an offense, it was a minor offense, but an offense nonetheless. You know, it could be considered backbiting, to be honest with you, based on the definition of the Prophet ﷺ, to make mention of your brother that which they don't like. And so when they're sitting there and they're making jokes about how skinny the legs of Abdullah bin Mas'ud are, the Prophet ﷺ says, Wallahi, those legs in the sight of Allah are heavier than the mountains of Uhud. Those legs are heavier than the mountains of Uhud in the scale of Allah, in the scale of khair. Because who do they belong to? They belong to Abdullah bin Mas'ud. Look at the person that those legs belong to, right? And so at every turn of his life, the Prophet ﷺ saw an opportunity to preserve the honor and dignity of his brothers and sisters and people around him, even people who were not Muslim. Even people who were not Muslim, the idea that the Prophet ﷺ stood at the procession of a non-Muslim funeral, and when he was asked about that, he said it was a human soul. right? The dignity of people is something that we as Muslims believe is sacred. Well, Allah Ta'ala says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. We gave the children of Adam, honor. This is something that Allah gave to us. We should not be the ones taking it away. So this is a responsibility that we have. And it's not just a responsibility that's in 2018. It's something that has been going on since our entire religious tradition. Dhulm is something that we have to be very careful with. And we cannot be accomplice to dhulm. We cannot be a person that stands by and lets it happen. We have to be people that when we see it, we respond to it in a way that tries to remedy the situation. Now granted, there are protocol. There is a procedure. We don't believe in Islam in the dark night. We don't believe in Batman. We don't believe, for those of you who don't get that joke, all right, Batman is a problematic figure because even though he stands for justice, he did it in his own way. And the idea is, and subhanAllah, this is actually a very deep conversation, but even like Harry Potter, you guys ever watch Harry Potter? Do you know how many rules he broke? Right? He did good, but he broke all the rules along the way, right? So we believe in Islam that doing good, we believe in doing good, but we also believe that there is a protocol, there's a procedure. There is a way to get things done, there's a way to accomplish things. So we stand for justice, we stand for rectification of wrong, but we also make sure that we do it in a way that doesn't cause more fitna than the wrongs to begin with, right? Now the second thing that I want to reflect on, besides the idea that this is without a doubt dhulm, is, inshallah, and we'll get some chairs for the brothers who are coming in. The second idea is that where is this dhulm now taking place? This dhulm that we are talking about, there's no doubt that we all experience this at some point in our lives, at our homes, in our families, in our communities. Even the community of the Prophet ﷺ, he had people coming to him complaining about being oppressed. So is there ever a time, is there ever a situation where we will be able to eradicate oppression completely, in totality? Probably not, because it existed in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. It existed in Medina. There will always be a time when people are being wronged, right? And that's part of what it means to be in this dunya, is that we are living in a society, in a system that has its deficiencies, and we have to learn how to work through them, right? But there's one thing that is an important talking point about this specific kind of dhulm that we're talking about, and that is it is happening in an environment that is supposed to be an ideal environment. Then when we talk about dhulm in the masjid, it's completely different. When I was a kid, I used to have a lot of, when I say kid, I mean like 15, 16, I used to have a lot of hang-ups about certain things. There was a notion that, okay, well, if I go to the masjid, I'm going to dress differently. Right? This is something that our teachers used to teach us, that when you go to the masjid, that you should have some sort of beauty with it, some ornamentation. And Western secular kids growing up in America, you're like, no, I gotta be who I am, right? I'm gonna wear whatever I wear. I'm sure you've seen this, in your work with youth, like, no, why can't I just be me, right? So your mom is giving you a thobe, or your mom's giving you a shawar kameez or a hijab, and you're like, no, I'm not gonna be inauthentic, I have to be true to myself. The reality is that this is not an accurate assessment of how we treat any other situation. When we're going to a wedding, we don't wear our pajamas. When we go to an interview for a job, we don't wear sweatpants. Right? If you do, you're probably not going to do well in the job interview, right? So when it comes to the house of Allah, there are certain ideals that, sure, they may not be who we are all the time, but we are rising to the occasion of the environment that we are stepping into. And so when it comes to the sanctity of this environment, these 4 or 5 walls that we are surrounded by, the roof over our head that we are surrounded by, sure, the drywall might be the same one that was used to build your house. The painter may have used the same paint here that they did in every other house in the subdivision. But this is a masjid, this is the house of Allah. Allah Ta'ala talks about His house in the Quran. The Prophet ﷺ talks about the virtue of this house. So when it comes to our expectations, we already have our own expectations about dhulm in general in the world. But now we have to elevate that expectation for the house of Allah even higher. Because this is a special place with special conditions and special experiences. This is a place where we come here for Ramadan. It's not the same praying tarawih in your living room as it is in the masjid in the house of Allah. And so when it comes to securing and making sure that our homes of worship are places of safety, then this is an amana that all of us have a responsibility in. Because the special nature of this place demands it from us. It demands it from us. You know, it's one thing, my mom always used to, I don't know if you guys ever had this growing up, my mother always used to say, you know what, whenever you're at home, you can act however you want. You know, it's different at home, but when we go to a dawah, when we go to a dinner invite, when you go to an azuma, how did you act? You sat there with your coloring book, and if you even did one thing, my mom would just do this. Right? She's a Masriya woman, she's an Egyptian woman. What would she do? Right? Just that. And you knew what? You knew what? Like at home, there's going to be some violations, right? Some legal violations. Anyway, so the point being is that there was a very different expectation that my mother had in special situations and scenarios than at home. So when it comes to our trust level of the masjid, it needs to be heightened. And no person can walk through these doors and think that we are just going to be a consumer. I'm just going to benefit from the masjid and not somehow give back. I'm just going to benefit from the masjid and not somehow be a productive member of this community and try to make this place a safe, happy place for the people that come here. This is why the word that I want us all to remember, the first word is dhulm, that we want to make sure that we protect this house from dhulm. The second is I want us to remember the word amana. The word amana in the Arabic language means a trust. A trust. And this is something that we all have to think about deeply when it comes to our responsibility with these houses of Allah, is that we have been entrusted with the responsibility of maintaining this space. You know, even down to the organization of the Qur'ans and the Masahif, even down to the cleanliness of the carpet. If you were praying here and you saw a wrapper, a candy wrapper on the ground, besides the fact that we shouldn't have that here, but you would pick it up because why? You feel this amana about this place. What about if somebody came to you and told you that their rights have been violated in this place? Is that amana not greater? Is that amana not something that is even higher? And this is something that I know we're kind of thinking about it like, oh, that's kind of an extreme example, but the reality is that it's not. The reality is that there are many instances where children might come, and it may not be something like physical or sexual abuse, may Allah protect us. It may be something like, I got yelled at. And I'll be honest with you, my son Musa, all of you are seeing how comfortable he is in the masjid, yes? You guys see how distracting he is? Why is he distracting here? Because he's comfortable here. And I'm just going to be very honest with you. Mehreen and I, my wife and I, we very selectively decide which masjid we're going to go to for things like Jummah and Tarawih. Why? Because we know that our amana as his parents is that we cannot put him in a masjid that's going to make him hate masajid. We cannot put him in a masjid where if he acts like a kid, which is his job, that someone's going to yell at him and tell him get out. I remember, by the way, when I was younger, and I was praying Tarawih prayer, and some kids were sitting in the back. 20 rak'ah is hard for kids, man, let's be honest. It's hard for adults, let's be honest, right? Let alone kids. So the kids were sitting, they prayed their 8, and they were sitting in the back. It was the last 10 nights, they were waiting for all the good stuff, the laddus and gulab jamun and everything to come out. And they were sitting there, and as everybody, adults act like they don't talk, man. I'm meeting out at a masjid. Adults talk, I'm coming into the masjid for Jummah, and there's adults talking in the parking lot. The kids are waiting in the masjid. Everyone acts like the kids are the worst ones, let's be honest, right? So the kids were talking, and sure, you know what? I remember I was like 14, 15. These kids were maybe 12, 13, they were like a grade below me. And what happens? They were talking a little bit, okay, maybe a little bit too loud, I can understand that. After the salam of the witr prayer, there was an uncle that came back, and again, I'm sure he was very well intentioned. I'm sure he wanted the salah to have khushu. I'm sure he wanted all of this. But the way in which he communicated was so destructive. He went to the kids and he said to them, get out and never come back. And all the kids listened, they left. And one of my teachers, one of my mashayikh, Sheikh Ihab went to him and he said, come here right now. And he came to him and he said, if those kids listen to you, you better go right now and beg them to come back. You better go and beg them to come back. Because if they listen to you on the Day of Judgment, you're going to have a very difficult conversation with Allah. That why did you tell my servants to leave my house and never come back? So what I'm trying to say is, all of this is part of a greater conversation of this concept of amana. That we all have a deep responsibility of making sure that this house, this home of Allah, is welcoming, is safe, is comfortable for any person who comes in it. Any person who walks in it. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, when he was giving khutbah one time, his grandson, his grandchildren, Al-Hasan and Hussein, one narration was one of them, one narration was both, came walking through the the congregation. And he stepped down from his mimbar, which is an act of ibadah, an act of worship. He steps down, which is the first 2 rak'ah of the Dhuhr prayer on Jummah. He steps down, he picks up his grandson, he carries him to the mimbar and says, this is going to be a master home. Like, what does that tell us about the idea of making these places safe and welcoming and warm for especially young people? Because they're so impressionable. And then, subhanAllah, we get the phone calls in the middle of the night. I'm sure, you know, our Imam, mashallah, here, and Imam Haris, I'm sure they've gotten phone calls from concerned parents. What's the concern? My son or daughter never wants to go to the masjid. And the question that I always ask is, when did you start to tell them to come? When did you start to encourage them to go to the masjid? And the answer is always late in their teens, 18, 19, 20. For the first 18 years of their life, they were told, don't come to the masjid. You're distracting. Don't come to the masjid. We can't focus. Don't come to the masjid. It's not a place for you. Only Sunday school for 1 hour. We're going to learn Tawheed for 1 hour and then go home. There was never a feeling of belonging. That amana was taken away from them, wasn't upheld in its appropriate way. So we've told children for 15 years, don't come to the masjid. And then when they're 16, we start saying, go to the masjid, and they say, why now? We have to rethink how we treat this place. We all have a responsibility here. You know, the word for leadership or responsibility in Arabic is mas'uliyah. What does mas'uliyah mean in Arabic literally? We use it for responsibility, but what does it mean literally? What is su'al in Arabic? Anybody? What does it mean? Question. Mas'uliyah is the thing that you are going to be asked about. We all are going to have this question, this conversation with Allah. How did you treat my home? Did you make it welcoming? Did you make it a place that featured a warmth for people who walked in? So the first word is dhulm, the second is amana, and the third is that we all, it's not an Arabic word, but that what happens if we do have some sort of idea or we do have confirmation that something has occurred. The two responses that we've had in our community so far have been this. The first is, don't tell anybody. Let's just keep it internal. Look out in here, right? Like, what's everyone going to think if we talk about, you know, let's keep our dirty laundry. We already have Islamophobes and Zionists, and Trump's going to like shut us down. And, like, let's just keep all this dirty stuff inside, right? All the masala, let's just keep it inside the club, right? And there's no concern about the actual safety or health of the individuals involved. It's more so this giant communal concern, this big communal concern, okay? And the second response is, let's burn it all to the ground. Let's go ahead and post everything on the internet. Let's go ahead and just throw everything out there. Let's not confirm the allegations. Let's just go ahead and like tweet, live tweet. This is what's happening. This is what. The response that we learned from our Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is obviously وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا. It's a balanced, moderate response. It's not one that completely ignores, nor is it one that completely just engages and lets the person have conversation openly before things have been verified. Allah Ta'ala tells us, فَتَبَيَّنُوا, you have to verify things. But in that same surah, He talks about the danger of things like backbiting, things like gossip, things like insulting, and things like even hurting people. So in the same surah that Allah tells us to verify claims, He also tells us not to allow these horrible things to happen. See, there's a balance there in Surah Hujurat. So if we are ever in a situation where our children or the children of our community or any individual of our community says, they come to us and they say, I have a complaint about something and it was harassing or abusive in nature, our response has to be to take things seriously and to report them to the appropriate authorities to get the situation handled in a way that is responsible and in a way that is productive and in a way that actually accomplishes the goal of making this home a safe place for our community. That involves talking to the leadership of the masjid. That involves talking to law enforcement, if necessary. That involves talking to families. That involves having conversation. That involves making sure that things are recorded, making sure that details and testimony are taken care of. These are all things that you can learn more about when you talk to people like Brother Gamal and others. But my point that I'm trying to make to everybody is that taking these things seriously is not something that we can take lightly. When somebody comes to us and says, I have a complaint about this, this person the way that they made me feel, or they approached me in a way that made me uncomfortable, X, Y, Z. It's not something that we have the liberty. You okay, baby? He's all right. It's not something that we have the liberty of. Kids are very resilient. They're like cannibals, right? I feel bad for the wall, actually, right? So it's not something that we have the liberty to say, you know what? It's not a big deal. Just go ahead and make dua, pray, and it'll all be okay. Yeah, make dua and pray, of course. That is part of the solution to every problem. Reattaching ourselves with Allah is part of the solution to every problem. But if that was the solution to every problem, then you wouldn't have the Prophet ﷺ actually reconciling between people when they had actual problems. When they came to him and said, that person didn't give me my money, my right, the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't say, go and pray, make dua, Allah will take care of it. Obviously, we know that that's part of it. It's like telling someone to breathe. Yes, I know I have to breathe. But on top of breathing, on top of making dua, on top of praying, what else can I do to rectify the situation? Right? That's why the Prophet ﷺ would tell them, this is the solution. Go and give this person this right. Go and sell this back to this person. Go and return this back to this person. Because there is the hukuk that Allah has upon us, and there's the hukuk that we have upon one another. And both of them have to be restored. If I have the audacity, when somebody comes and verbalizes and tells me, which by the way is a very difficult thing to do aslan, like in its essence, it's not easy for somebody to come in and open up about things that they've experienced. If I have the audacity to ignore it or shut it down, then that is a deep problem, and I will have to rest assured that Allah Ta'ala will ask me about that on the Day of Judgment. This is something that we have to solve and we have to work through it. And I'll tell you, the more that we hide these things, the more that we ignore them, because this is how it was handled back home, the more that we will have to answer for. And honestly, even in this life, the more that it will be very, very difficult and uncomfortable when it all comes to fruition. One of the things that we learned from Umar bin Khattab, which is very interesting, is that when he one time was talking to somebody, there was somebody who got caught stealing. And he went to Umar and he told Umar, please don't punish me, this is my first time. And Umar told him what? You never get caught on your first time. The point that, if you read this athar and you read some of the commentary on it, and the person, by the way, admitted, yeah, this wasn't my first time. The point that some of the scholars talk about is that not every single sin, but the nature of sin, like a lie, for example, lies eventually become apparent. And the nature of sin, when it happens, is that eventually it'll start to become apparent to people. Eventually it'll start to happen, whether it's through conversation or whether it's through something. And now with technology, it's even more open to society. So our role is that when we know that something like this has happened, is not to hide it, because hiding it ultimately is a fruitless endeavor. Our role is to make sure that we do right by Allah and by the people who are seeking help. We ask Allah Ta'ala to grant us this. We ask Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala to make us courageous enough to make these homes safe. We ask Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala to give us the ability to have this concept of amana in the houses of Allah. And we ask Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala to purify our homes and purify our souls from these diseases that are causing these issues, and to grant us all of the strength to be able to master ourselves so that we don't fall short. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Subhanallah wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. I'm going to ask everybody for your permission to take leave. My son, I don't know if you've heard him coughing, but he's pre-asthmatic, so this is all going to lead to an inhaler in about 3 minutes, inshallah. So I'm going to try to get him home for bedtime. He's recovering from a cold and ear infection. So if I could just ask everyone for your permission to take leave. I didn't want to cancel, even though my son, and now my wife, she has no voice right now, so it's been interesting today. But I'm going to try to get them home and have them nurse back to health. So I apologize for taking leave early, but I'm trying to get these people healthy, inshallah. Abdel-Hafiz, thank you for having me. Assalamu alaikum wa
rahmatullahi. Just a small gift for you from ourselves, from the community. Put on the table, Legend. And then you can write the one for Brother Gamal as well. So with that in mind, inshallah, we're going to invite Brother Gamal up to speak about it from more of a just principled perspective, more of a law perspective, and how we'll go about it with law enforcement and what rules we have to bear in mind.
Assalamu alaikum. follow Brother Murphy because he's the kinder, gentler speaker. I'm the hammer. So forgive me for that, and I will not repeat that mistake again. I will go first and run away, then people can talk about me behind my back. Actually, I'm very happy that Ustadh Murphy gave his presentation because it's just, this is the ground rule, what he said. This is the ground rule for what we all as Muslims need to do, and we need to follow. Now we need to as normal people, we as Muslims, we don't have this problem all over the place, okay? We're very fortunate because we fear him in everything we do. We all are striving to get to the grand prize of seeing Wajhullah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the Day of Judgment. So we try to do what's right. We all make mistakes, but the major ones, alhamdulillah, the majority of us, we have done. And I know we are the least community in the country that does this kind of mistakes. And I know that for a fact. I can congratulate the community on that. But we mix things sometimes because we don't dig deep into it. What's abuse and what's assault? You know, sometimes you say it's a sexual abuse, sexual assault. What's the difference between the two? They are both the same. No, they're not. Okay. The sexual abuse, it's almost always to children who don't have the power to push it back or say no, or they don't know what's happening to them. However, it can happen to an adult if you have a domestic help at your home that's living with you, and if you are sponsoring that domestic help, they don't know anybody here, they don't have anywhere to go, they don't know the rules, and they get sexually abused. That's abuse plus assault. Okay. I'm going to tell you why this is important to differentiate between all of them. We all know what rape is. Rape, it's been redefined in 2012 by the FBI. We all knew what rape was, but rape nowadays is completely different in nature by the FBI, which is any penetration, even slight or completely penetration, oral, vaginal, or anal. Okay? And this is very important because sometimes people just take it lightly, you know, and it doesn't have to be the penetration with a sexual organ. It can be penetration with anything. It's considered rape. Okay. The sexual assault, it really covers everything, from touching, from groping, from having unwanted sexual contact. And this is really became very known after the Me Too movement. It became widely known. When a child comes to us and say, somebody did this to me, sometimes children make up stuff. No one will know your child better than you. So you need to ask quietly. Don't blow your stack. Don't get mad. Don't get angry because the child's helpless. They may imagine things. They may actually have experienced something. But you need to be very creative in how to check your child's story. Especially the very little ones, the ones under age 5. because they cannot explain themselves very well. As an example, my youngest daughter, she was about 3, and I went to her room and I found marking with a pencil all over the wall. Of course, when I asked her, Dina, who did this, she said, it's Omar, the usual suspect in the house. And I said, but Omar didn't come here. She said, oh, it's the bear. I saw him doing it. Of course, you will never get anywhere with a child. So I said, okay, no problem. Then I walked a couple of steps out and I said, Dina, what were you drawing on the wall? She said, a horse. I said, okay, let's not draw any more horses. And this is just to you know how to deal with your child. You know that they make up stuff sometimes. But when it comes to this issue, please don't toss it away. Because you may destroy the personality and the self-esteem of your child for life. You don't have to be sure that something happened, by the way. Mere suspicion or witnessing something, you are required to report it to authorities. The mere suspicion or witnessing of something that you think is not right, you are required to report it to the authority. When I was still on the force of the FBI, we received a communication around 2014 that told us that any of us will hear about child abuse of any sort and not report it immediately will be prosecuted. As federal agent, you will be prosecuted because you know better than closing your eyes about something like this. So that's how important and how serious this is. When can you report it? If a child said, last year when we were visiting with so-and-so, this happened to me, then you say, after 1 year you come and tell me? Guess what? Child abuse, sexual assault and sexual abuse and child abuse, there is no statute of limitation. That's why you find our Catholic brothers, they go when they are in their 40s and they say, when I was 7 years old, the priest did this to me. And they accept it. There is no statute of limitation. Okay? So at any given time you hear about it, it doesn't matter when it happened, take it to the authorities. And usually the police doesn't go crazy and start arresting and grabbing people right away. They do interviews of the child by professionals who know how to talk to children. They show the child some photos to see if the child knows exactly what they're talking about or they're just imagining things. Okay. The internet now can make children much more mature before their time. And the police, unless they are convinced with the story, they will not make an arrest. They will get to the bottom of it, but they will not make an arrest unless they can take it and prosecute it. So don't hesitate to say, I think Gamal did this. Well, I wouldn't be offended if the police come and ask me if I did something wrong, and I didn't do it. But again, it's my responsibility to prove my innocence without getting angry at anybody. Okay? The sexual assault cases for adults, the statute of limitation is 10 years. So a lady who was sexually assaulted by somebody, she has 10 years to report this and get a prosecution. Okay? All other sex offenses are, of course, they are all felonies. All other felony sex offenses, statute of limitation 3 years. Then you say, okay, you covered abuse, you covered assault, what's other? Sexting is a sex offense. Sending somebody's picture Some people, they send naked picture for fun, then you find it all over the internet. That's